Hi, I'm Caleb, and in this video, we'll walk through how to write a test using Pleasantest. If you don't know what Pleasantest is, read the first part of the article linked. So the UI we're going to test is the Modal from Reach UI. We'll start by installing Jest, Pleasantest, and the types for Jest. Pleasantest integrates with Jest test, so that's why we need Jest. We can start the test runner in watch mode by running Jest with the watch flag. So we'll create our test file in the source folder and we'll call it index.test.js. The first thing we'll test is that when we click the open dialog button, the dialog shows up and the text inside the dialog is rendered. We can create the first test by calling the test function from Jest with a description of the test's functionality. To mark the test as a browser test, we'll use the with browser wrapper from Pleasantest. We'll have to import it as well. The first time that it runs will take a little bit longer because it has to launch the browser for the first time. We'll start by loading the JavaScript file that renders the application to the page. In this case, the index.js renders a React component to an element with an ID of root. To load that file, we'll call utils.loadjs with the path to the file. Utils is available as a parameter which gets passed to our test function by with browser. We'll also need to await the result because the browser is asynchronous. As I mentioned, the file expects an element with the ID of root to exist, so we'll create that as well. So at this point, we'll save the file and watch the test run again. Now we can find the button on the page and click it. We'll use the get by role matcher from testing library. The testing library queries are available through the screen object, which is also a parameter. So here we'll use the button role, and we'll also match against the text that we expect to see. So the test passed, which means that the element was found. Now that we've found the button, we want to make sure that the modal is not open before we click it. We'll check that the text in the modal is not present. We'll find the text by using the query by text matcher. In this case, before we click the button, the modal should be closed, so the query by text will return null. So this assertion should pass. The .not.to be in the document matcher comes from JestDom, and it makes sure that the element is not present. We also have to await the result of the matcher because checking for values in the browser is also asynchronous. We'll save the file to make sure that this passes. Next, we'll click the button and make sure that the dialog text appears. We'll use the user object to cause the click. The user object is also a parameter, and we'll need to save the button element as a variable so we can reference it here. To check that the dialog is visible, we'll use the same query as before. So this time, instead of not to be in the document, we'll use .to be visible. This also passes, so we're done with this first test. In our next test, we'll make sure that pressing the escape key closes the modal. Again, we'll use the with browser wrapper. We'll render exactly the same as we did in the first test, so we'll create a function for this behavior. In the function, we need access to the utils object, so we'll add it as a parameter. Now we'll call the render function in our new test. The next thing we need to do is open the dialog, same as we did the first time. We'll create a function for this as well. This time we need access to screen and user. Then we can call it in our test. I'm not going to call it in our first test because we're making extra assertions that we want to keep there. So now it renders and opens the dialog. We'll make an assertion to check that it is open, and then we'll press the escape key and make another assertion to make sure that it's closed. This will be the same assertions we used before, but they'll be in reverse order. So first we'll make sure that it's open. Then we'll close the dialog by pressing the escape key. The keyboard functionality comes from Puppeteer, and we'll use that directly using the page object. The page object is also a parameter. Now we'll make sure that the modal is closed. I'll save the file, and we can see that they both passed. Next, we'll test that the close button works to close the modal. We'll copy the test because it will be almost the same. This time, instead of using the page.keyboard method, we'll use user.click. We'll get the close button again by using the getByRole query. Even though we can't see the closed text on the page, we have visually hidden text for screen readers. Using testing library, we can make sure that that text is working correctly. If I save the file, we'll again see that the 3 tests ran and they all pass. There's one last way to close the modal, which is clicking the backdrop. We can test this as well using Pleasantest. I'll copy our test again because this will again be almost the same. Now instead of clicking on a specific element, we'll click at a certain X and Y coordinates because the backdrop isn't accessible to our queries. The user.click method is specifically for clicking elements, so instead of that we'll use page.mouse.click. The dimensions are in pixels, so clicking near the top left should be outside of the modal. When I save it, we'll see that they pass again. By now we've tested all the ways of opening and closing the modal. We should also test the accessibility structure and that the modal has the correct role. We'll again call render and open dialog. Now we'll check that we can find the dialog using the getByRole matcher. And we'll also check the accessible name of the dialog, which is visible to screen readers but not to sighted users. This is an important thing to test because it's really easy to have accessibility regressions and not notice them because they're not visible when you load the page. Having automated tests for this makes sure that anytime there's a regression, we find that right away. One behavior present in accessible modals is a focus trap. This means that when I press the tab key to cycle between focusable elements, it never cycles outside of the modal until the modal is closed. We can test the tab cycling using Pleasantest as well. We'll start the test in the same way as the others. So the first thing that we'll test is that when we open the modal, the close button is focused automatically. We'll find the close button in the same way we did before. We can make sure that it's focused by using one of the JSDOM matchers. Now we'll press the tab key several times to make sure that the focus cycles only within elements inside the dialog. We'll again use page.keyboard.press to press a specific key. We'll find the first link using a getByRole matcher. And we can check that it's focused in the same way. So now we'll press tab again and make sure that the next link gets focused. So now we'll press tab one more time and make sure that the focus cycles directly back to the close button. So I'll save this and make sure that this functionality is working correctly. Great. The one last thing that I'll test is to make sure that cycling the focus backwards also cycles to the last focusable element inside of the modal. When I press Shift Tab from the close button, the last link should get focused. To press the Tab key while we're holding down Shift, we have to call the methods individually to press and unpress the Shift key. And now we'll check that the last link in the modal gets focused. Now I'll save it and see if it passes. So now we've tested all the important functionality of the modal. I hope you get a chance to try out Pleasantest. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them on the article that's linked, or if you have any problems, open issues on GitHub. The link to the repository is also in the description.